so I think business leaders need to be aware of the impact of elections and governments and sentiment in other countries. And when we look at the election, if that happens, how will businesses navigate and balance between the changes on policy and where one chooses to put one's factories or how one works with other organizations. So I think the whole Middle East and North Africa is something that's worth watching and paying attention to right now. There's a lot of capital, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of young talent there. But watch the Middle East and North Africa, and especially if we can get peace in that region, really I think that could be a game changer. In terms of companies using AI or trying AI, it's 100%. Large companies, small companies, everybody's trying to move it into their workflow, trying to see how they can improve, both in terms of not only cost savings, but also how to serve customers better. And business leaders today are being pulled by these, what I call cross pressures, in opposite directions to do things that they can't figure out exactly what to do. Like they feel like no matter what they do, they're going to get it wrong. You know, how do you simultaneously, execute at a great operational scale, but also innovate at the same time? Not just inside of a company, but inside of us as an individual. And that's what leadership needs to be in the 21st century. And seeing these systems and the action and the reaction shows that people need to have this both broad view and this deep view and keep that inside internally. And I'm not going to promise that everything's going to be okay. I'm not going to promise that if you read the book, it won't still be hard. It's going to stay hard. But this is a set of tools and a framework that hopefully allows people to figure out how to ride through these cross pressures that business leaders on every continent are feeling.
はい、皆さんこんにちは。NTT データ経営研究所グローバルビジネス推進センターの石塚と申します。よろしくお願いいたします。本日のセッションは、スタンフォードビジネススクールの、ロバート・シーゲル、講師、をお招きして、今世界で起きているいろんな、政治的、経済的、技術的な、トレンドを踏まえてどのように、日本企業が、今後対応していったらいいのか、ということについて深く、お伺いをしていきたいと思います。合わせて、彼が来年、発行する予定でありますシステムズリーダーシップ、こちらの内容、について深掘りをしていきながら、皆様にお役に立てる情報をご提供できればと思っておりますのでよろしくお願いいたします。We'd like to discuss about the especially for the latest business topics regarding the global trends. And also, I heard from you that you are just preparing the new book for the systems leader. So I'd like to discuss this kind of things. So I just want to ask you about the U.S. election.
Well, I think with the U.S. election, we're seeing the continued really split in the country. And the real question in next week's election is what's the middle going to do? And I do know this, whatever the result is of the election, half of our country will be happy and half of our country will be unhappy. And most Americans are actually not happy with either candidate. The belief is that even if somebody likes Trump's policies, they may not like him as a person. With Harris, some people, or they might like some of the policies, they feel like she really didn't earn the right to be the nominee because it really had been Biden and then it was handed to her when President Biden dropped out. If Trump gets elected, I think you'll see a more pro-business administration. If Harris gets elected, you'll see more of the last 4 years. I think it'll be a continuation of Biden's policies. And so I think business leaders need to be aware of the impact of elections and governments and sentiment in other countries. And when we look at the election yesterday here in Japan, will that lead to a more pro-China government versus a pro-US government? If that happens, how will businesses navigate and balance between the changes on policy and where one chooses to put one's factories or how one works with other organizations. So I think business leaders need to be very tuned into political dynamics in ways that they didn't have to before, because I think companies are increasingly more global at both larger and smaller companies. And also they need to know how to work with shifting trends inside of various governments and various countries. And I think that business leaders need to be very attuned to it. And leaders cannot let their own personal opinions and political views necessarily shape what's right for the company, what's right for the employees, what's right for customers and suppliers. This is part of the navigation that leaders need to do on an ongoing basis. Historically, in particular the last 30 years, the large tech companies have been very progressive and very pro-democrat.
I see.
And so, yet in this particular situation, what we're seeing with the activities of Musk and other tech leaders, some have come out for Trump even more so than they would have in the past. And even if people don't like Trump the person, they might like his policies because they think he'll be more pro-business. So I think leaders of whatever type of company need to be prepared and ready for whoever might win the election and have a playbook ready for either world possibility.
I see. How's this U.S. and China relationship will be moving forward? Getting worse or getting better or the same situation, or there are several types of the scenario?
I think in the near term, it's going to stay the same, but that's very bad. I mean, the relationship is not strong between the countries. And if I'm here in Japan, I assume that I'm going to be pulled between these two global superpowers. The thing for a country like Japan, China's your next door neighbor, and China's not going away. So Japan's going to have to figure out how it continues to have its strong relationship with the United States for defense purposes and business purposes, but also it can't ignore China. And so to the extent that Japanese leaders and business leaders can have a peaceful and healthy relationship with Chinese companies, that's a good thing. But I think you have to assume that it'll stay very tense between China and the U.S.
The U.S. companies are considering the kind of the decoupling.
Right.
So just cutting up the supply chains. But so Japan is still aligning with the U.S. So Japan is trying to make some sort of the decoupling. So how to make a better balance in this situation?
Even with all the tensions between the U.S. and China, the U.S. still manufactures a lot of stuff in China. So this notion of a decoupling will never hit in the next 10 years any sort of full decoupling. It's just not going to happen. I remember 33 years ago, one of my mentors and teachers, Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, stood in front of one of my classrooms and said, "You will never go to war with a country if that's where you put your factories." And he was talking about the US and China. And 33 years later, that was a pretty smart statement by Dr. Grove. And so the US is still making stuff there, and everyone needs to be aware of that. Now the question is, what are we making in China? And what are, when I had the retiring CEO of Nike, John Donahoe, come to class, one of the points that was made in our discussion was he's making t-shirts and tennis shoes. That's not a matter of national defense. And 20% of his revenues come from China. Like it's a very big market for him, not only from the manufacturing side, but from the consumer side. If one's making semiconductors or sensitive military equipment, that's where I think you're likely to see the decoupling.
From the U.S. viewpoint, so what kind of other countries the movement and the activities might big effect to the U.S. businesses?
Well, so let me take it into three parts. Let me talk first about Asia, and then I'll talk about Europe, and then I want to talk about the Middle East. I think with Asia, you've got this very challenging dynamic that a lot of companies are increasingly coming into the U.S. politically, at least from a defense and security standpoint right now. I say that as neither good nor bad, it just is. Europe's got a different challenge. Europe has no means to defend itself. And they have not had great technological commercialization in the last 30 years. And that's a real problem for Europe. How will they stay competitive against very talented and aggressive American and Chinese companies? And so Europe's got to find that balance. The part of the world that catches my attention right now, increasingly, is the Middle East. Aside from what's happening in Israel, Palestine, and that conflict, like what's happening in the Saudi Arabia right now is staggering. You know, this is a country that in the last 6 years has had an amazing overhaul economically, social norms, and is really uniquely positioned in between that kind of China-US situation. You know, from a Saudi standpoint, China is their biggest customer. So I think the whole Middle East and North Africa is something that's worth watching and paying attention to right now. There's a lot of capital, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of young talent there. And so that's the one thing that catches my attention right now. I mean, we have to pay attention, obviously, to Asia and Europe, given the size of the relative areas, but watch the Middle East and North Africa, and especially if we can get peace in that region, really, I think that could be a game changer.
In the US companies, so how's the progress of the AI utilization? So how they are successfully using the AI technology to their businesses?
In terms of companies using AI or trying AI, it's 100%. Large companies, small companies, everybody's trying to move it into their workflow, trying to see how they can improve, both in terms of not only cost savings, but also how to serve customers better. And no company can be held up as the trophy of, here's a company that completely transformed itself because of AI. And largely that's because we are still in the very early days. You know, ChatGPT was released less than 2 years ago. Again, we see things in customer service and marketing in particular, a little bit in operations. Over time, I expect when you and I have this conversation next year and the year after, we'll have many more at scale examples. There are lots of little examples, but nothing at scale yet that I'm familiar with.
But the key question is whether we can deploy and adapt the AI capabilities into manufacturing industry.
I'm going to start from the product management side and then how that works into manufacturing. The nature of the products that we build, I think, will change because of AI. Well, as the product manager's role changes, as he or she has to trust the machine to run the experiments and then has to kind of come in and adjust the nature of the test or the results after the fact, that will change what gets into manufacturing. And part of it is trying to understand more about how will people use the products? How do you know it ahead of time? Well, if you know how your customer is going to use the products, you know the probability that a certain part's going to wear out or a product part should be designed a particular way. And so the AI starts at the design standpoint when you understand what customers want better, and then you can ask questions of how to actually make or manufacture, whether it's the type of materials you use or the manufacturing process, to help meet that need, because the needs are going to change as we get more data on customer and customer insights. And so I think it may sound a little indirect, but you have to think about the system. You have to think about it holistically. It's not just about when you should service the machine. We've been doing predictive analytics for a while, but it's the nature of what we build and how we build it. That's what will change, and AI will give us insights into that.
He will make the new book dedicating for the systems leadership. Compared to the original idea of the systems leadership, so how you are changing this systems leadership terminology?
What we see is that we are in a world of constant crisis and increasingly rapid technological change. And business leaders today are being pulled by these, what I call cross pressures, in opposite directions to do things that they can't figure out exactly what to do. Like they feel like no matter what they do, they're going to get it wrong. You know, how do you simultaneously, execute at a great operational scale, but also innovate at the same time. Not just inside of a company, but inside of us as an individual. And these cross pressures that pull us in different directions, the leaders feel like they're going to get it wrong and possibly get fired or lose their position or lose their competitive edge. And I argue that systems leadership and being a systems leader is a way of understanding this action and reaction between what's going on inside of a company or between a company and its market and its ecosystem. And it's the ability to master the dualities, as I call them, between these cross pressures. And as the new book comes out next year, I look at 5 of these cross pressures. And then I talk about how leaders are being pulled in opposite directions on these cross pressures and how some of the leaders we studied navigated through it. And so as we look through the systems leadership book, we look at how a variety of leaders are managing these cross pressures and getting their organizations through it. And of the leaders we study, all of them are successful by any measure. By the size of the company they run, the number of people they manage, how their companies are doing. And it's not that everything's perfect, but we see how they try to get through them. And by the way, these aren't the men and women we see all the time in the mainstream media. These aren't the people we see on social media all the time. These are people who bring a gravitas to tough issues. They lead on nuanced issues in a world that has no nuance. And they realize they need to lead everybody. Everybody in their organization, people who they agree with and disagree with, and people who agree with them and agree with them. And that's what leadership needs to be in the 21st century. And seeing these systems and the action and the reaction shows that people need to have this both broad view and this deep view and keep that inside internally. And I'm not going to promise that everything's going to be okay. I'm not going to promise that if you read the book, it won't still be hard. It's going to stay hard. But this is a set of tools and a framework that hopefully allows people to figure out how to ride through these cross pressures that business leaders on every continent are feeling.
AI is impacting currently to the leadership. So how's the impacting to the systems leadership by the new IT AI technologies? How do you think about it?
I think the biggest issue with these technologies is less about what specifically is AI going to do, but from a leadership standpoint, are the men and women who are leaders in their companies today, and that doesn't mean just C-level, it could be manager, director, vice president, are people current and understanding of how these technologies work and how it impacts their organization. Because it's not that people like you and I have to be able to write code that can generate the algorithm, but you and I are going to have to make decisions on where we invest our capital, what type of people we hire, how we serve our customers better. And unless we understand how the technology works and what it can do, we can't make those types of business decisions. And maybe in the old days, you could depend upon your engineers to say, all right, give me this answer. That's not good enough. People like you and I need to have an opinion on, okay, I understand how the tech works, therefore I need to hire these types of people. Yes, I need to talk to experts, but I also need to have enough knowledge inside of myself to be able to make educated decisions. And I think it's that process of constant reinvention and constant improving our own skill sets. And when you get to our level, our age, it's really hard. You and I got promoted and we got raises when we did things a particular way and as we rose up through the ranks. And what if that no longer works? What if we now have to change how we do things while we have to lead others? That's part of being a systems leader, is kind of having that humbleness to say, okay, I don't know all the answers, but I'm going to learn, and I'm going to work with my team to help them get through this transition.
So you mentioned the new book will be published. Can you share your thoughts to the what kind of things you want to share your thoughts to the Japanese audience and Japanese companies?
I think the biggest message is that there's nothing that is confronting today's leaders in Japan or otherwise that great business people can't solve. I really am very optimistic about what's possible in business and for society. And the things that I try to lay out in the book, the examples I try to give, they are tools to help people to deal with this increasingly challenging world. And nobody who's running a company should try to be Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Sam Altman or these very bombastic leaders that we see all the time. They should try to be exactly who they are. And what I would hope is that we can identify the stresses that people are feeling, that they'll read the book and say, yeah, that's what I'm going through. We can show some best practices of people who've been able to navigate through some of those cross pressures. And people will feel like, okay, I at least have a set of tools that I can try to apply. And it's not that I'm going to guarantee success, but I'm going to give you some tools to address your problems and ways to think through it. And I want them to be hopeful, to know that no matter how challenging the world feels, whether it's elections or stresses between the US and China, or whether it's the speed with which AI is coming in, that there's a set of things that people can do that will allow them to navigate through these challenging times. Because I don't think the challenging times are going away. Not that it's ever been easy, but how do we deal with these sets of times? So you asked what was different than Peter Senge. I think just the world is moving so much faster, and a lot of what he described originally in the fifth discipline is still relevant, but how do we make sure that we use it in today's world?
Okay, thank you so much.